So for mitigation, much of this is about reduction in climate emissions, in carbon emissions. And that could be for buildings around reductions in the energy use, and for transportation, it's about reductions in the burning of fossil fuels. And there are many approaches that we can take to this, but the thing that we would really like to see is that the benefits that you get from those carbon emissions are actually monetizable so that they can be fully invested in, and so that they can be measured appropriately so that they can be included into ESG ratings. From an adaptation standpoint, what we would really like to see is infrastructure that is resilient to particular effects. And the questions are, what kind of effects should we be resilient to? Are we talking about catastrophic things like wildfire or hurricane? Or are we talking about things that are perhaps a little bit more creeping, like higher rainfall intensity, prolonged drought, or overheating risk for people inside those buildings? And all of those are, of course, somewhat monetizable. We also need to understand whether what we're trying to protect against is life safety, or to make sure that we have life safety, or whether we're actually looking for business continuity. And there's a difference in the way in which that would be insured and the way that that would be invested in. And I think that it's important that in our asset management and our development, we're very, very clear what it is that we want to protect for. So one of the things that we find is that it is actually quite difficult to monetize the mitigation and adaptation of our assets. And one of the things that cities and countries can do is that they can begin to put guidance and regulation into place that begins to either incentivize or to otherwise nudge actors, investors, developers into particular patterns of behavior. So the kinds of things that we're beginning to see are things like 80 by 50 plans in a number of cities in the US that are looking to try to reduce the carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And the kinds of things that they're beginning to look to do are things around the electrification of buildings, the electrification of transportation systems, and then ultimately the change in the way in which we might use energy in construction and in industry. But one of the things that cities can do that individual investors cannot is that they can start incentivizing particular things because there are other reasons to support it. So for example, you might incentivize the electrification of transport in a city because it actually tends to reduce emissions, which tends to improve air quality, which is not actually entirely related to carbon emissions, but it is very much related to quality of life. And the cities have the ability to take a holistic view of those issues. One of the things that we have tended to think about is that things will largely stay the same. We are tending to look at risk in terms of we will continue to be able to operate and exist in these particular cities. We will continue to have structures and infrastructures and commercial structures that are similar to the ones that exist now. But some of the more extreme climate change projections are beginning to show sea level rise 4 degrees, 3 degrees, and those kinds of things will be catastrophic for infrastructure that is built at relatively low level. And if you start to look at how many major cities in the world and even some countries are actually below the level that sea level would be at, I think you begin to see risks of migration, risks of actual economic breakdown that are far more significant than we're really built into our calculations and thinking at this point.